Part 269. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2686. Zhou Man accompanied the army, and Zhou Dalan and Xiao Qian were so worried that they personally went to the street and watched them leave the city with the people. Man Bao walked in the team on horseback wearing an official robe, and the students of the imperial physician's office sat in the carriage behind her. She glanced at the crowd of farewells on the side, and saw Zhou Dalan, Xiao Qianqi and others in the crowd. She couldn't help smiling, raised her hand and waved to them. Although he only sent her out of the house in the morning, Xiao Qian's eyes were still hot, and he waved to her, "Manbao, Manbao." Zhou Dalan half-hugged her and said, "Don't worry, Bai Shan is also following, it will be fine." But Bai Shan may not be in the same place as Zhou Man. After leaving the capital, the emperor ordered the guards of honor to be put away and the whole army hurried to Leizhu. Urgent travel is really urgent. Even the emperor is on horseback most of the time. This time, he took 10,000 forbidden troops to travel, but he did not bring much food and grass with him. Basically, it was only enough for 7 days. He went straight to Leizhu. Rush. In the end, the students who were the most uncomfortable were the students of the imperial physician's office. Others, not to mention the imperial army, they are soldiers and courtiers. Except for the younger and older, who has never traveled. The 6 arts of a gentleman are basic, so there is no problem, but the younger generation is a little uncomfortable. Bai Shan and the others have some experience in traveling to the west and expeditions, and they are still used to it, but other young officials who have never traveled far, as well as students from the imperial physician's office, are in trouble. Riding a horse, my thighs were sore after 2 days in a row, and not everyone can ride a horse. Especially the female students, their faces were pale for several days. While comforting them, Man Bao said to them, "This is just the beginning, and it will only be more difficult to wait on the battlefield, so while there is still time, you have to adapt as soon as possible, and you have to exercise." So, as long as there is a gap, she asks each student to get on and off the bus with their own medicine box and follow the team. Sometimes when the team is slow, she also asks them to carry the medicine box and run along with the imperial guards. All students, crying to death. Girls, in particular, are simply embarrassed. However, there was no time for them to get used to it. After arriving in Qizhu, they parted ways. The emperor ordered the Minister of Punishment to appoint Liang as the chief commander of Pyongyang Road, and attacked Pyongyang by sea from Leizhu. Liaodong City attacked. Zheng Tai took some students from the Tai department to follow Feng Shangshu to cross the sea with the army, and he selected all the male students. Man Bao also intends to let the female students follow him. At that time, she will leave a few people for Imperial Physician Lu, and the rest will be taken to Liaodong Road. Sheng Jia first stopped at Pingzhou from the sea, and then Zhou Man took him and Bai Shan to separate, and she would go to the front line with Zhao Qiuagong. Bai Shan can only stand in the crowd and watch her leave. They will also go to Yingzhou, but the speed will be slower. Now Zhao Qiuagong is a light car and goes to Yingzhou quickly. The soldiers and horses dispatched by the emperor had not yet reached the front line. After all, unlike the Forbidden Army, which was basically equipped with army horses, the infantry troops who were dispatched still accounted for the majority, although they had been rushing, and the speed was slower. Zhao Qiuagong arrived in Yingzhou half a day earlier than them, which was all calculated. Yingzhou Niu Shishi personally went out to welcome people in. The grain and grass that the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Household raised in Liaodong Road had already arrived, but the medicinal materials and medical supplies prepared by the Imperial Physician Department were still half a day behind them. Zhou Man directly took the students to receive it. Niu Shishi, who was about to send someone to count, saw Zhou Man for the first time, and was a little stunned for a while. Zhao Qiuagong smiled and said, All things like medicinal materials are handed over to the imperial physician's office. We don't have to intervene, we just need to check the bill. Niu Shishi was a little surprised when he saw that Zhao Qiagong brought so many women with his army, and he couldn't help but say at this time, "General Manager, the medicinal materials will save the lives of the soldiers, just leave them to them." He still prefers a military doctor in the army to take over. Zhao Qiagong waved his hand and said, "Leave it all to Lord Zhou, and let the military doctors in the army also listen to Lord Zhou's dispatch." He smiled at Niu Shishi, "Master Niu, don't underestimate Master Zhou, you will know how powerful she is when you are on the battlefield." Niu Shishi was dubious, but he did hear Zhou Man's name. He heard that she cured the prince, let the prince give birth to a little grandson, and directly settled the world with a child. Even the much-loved Prince Gong went to the domain because of this. He also went to the western regions, and seemed to have obtained a prescription for the treatment of smallpox, and made great contributions. Thinking of this, Niu Shishi became more cautious and no longer had any opinions. Zhao Qiagong said, "Let's talk about the battle, don't you have any doubts on the Koguryo side?" "It shouldn't be. Although Chenbing is still at the border, everyone's atmosphere has improved a lot recently, and they don't fight at every turn." Zhao Qiagong nodded in satisfaction, "Block the news of our coming, and wait until our troops arrive. By the way, where are our troops?" "It's almost there, and it must be there by noon tomorrow at the latest." Zhao Qiagong was satisfied, "Okay, the soldiers are very fast, as long as they arrive at us, they will start." The Hu army was led by Ashina and other Hu generals, with a total of 60,000 people. As soon as they arrived, before Man Bao could talk to General Ashina, Zhao Shangshu ordered an attack. Zhou Man could only take a group of students to the front line combat camp. Zhao Qiagong was in command, but Niu Shishi led his troops on the expedition. First, he was more familiar with the Goguryeo army. Second, he also wanted to make up for his mistakes. He came up with the strategy of attacking Goguryeo by the Three Kingdoms and executed it, but he died halfway through the execution. He was so tired that the imperial army came to help. His Majesty was driving the expedition in person. Can be successfully implemented. The Dajin army was unexpected, and the Hu army with assistance was also very brave, and directly captured a city. Zhao Qiagong was very satisfied, and moved the front line forward. Zhou Man and the others had their medical accounts set up not far from the battle. The wounded soldiers who were still angry on the battlefield were basically carried to the medical account. Man Bao stood in the crowd and gave command. "The leg can't be saved, immediately sawed off to stop the bleeding, shake something, put the cleaned intestines in order, yes, that's it, check for any bleeding spots, and make sure there is no suture. Stop the bleeding first, what kind of wound is there to clean up with so much bleeding? Press to stop the bleeding, you, come and help her, cooperate with acupuncture and moxibustion to stop the bleeding." Man Bao walked all the way and kept giving orders and corrections. It was the first time that the students had seen so many injured people. Even though they had seen blood in the imperial physician's office, their hands and feet were still trembling, and their heads were a little foggy. Zhou Liru should be the fastest. Whether it's stitching, stopping bleeding, applying medicine, or sawing arms and legs, she can keep her face intact. A soldier carried a stretcher and flew down, shouting, "The army has been wounded by an arrow." The military doctor took a look and immediately turned to look for Zhou Man. There was a barb in the middle of his left chest, and it was difficult to pull it out. Man Bao glanced at it, then pointed to the medical account on the side and said, "Carry it in." She glanced at the busy students, and saw that although their faces were pale, there was no big problem with the movements of their hands. After all, they had also studied for 4 or 5 years. Then she turned around and entered the hospital account. "See you tomorrow." Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2687. The military doctor said, "This kind of arrow has barbs. Once it is pulled out, it will damage the flesh and blood, and it will not be rescued due to heavy bleeding, and I don't know if it has hurt the heart. If it is normal, even if he is a general, the military doctor will not immediately treat this kind of injury. They will choose to save the people who can be saved first, and then start to do it if they are not dead after saving them. After all, it takes a long time to save this person. It may be saved in one day, but the number of soldiers who died outside because they failed to stop the bleeding could number in the hundreds. The military camp is so realistic, they have to maximize their interests." Man Bao checked it and felt that it could be saved, so she asked Zibing to bring her medicine box, and she put a piece of cloth in Lu Shen's mouth and let him bite. "It's too late to wait for the numbness to dissipate, please bear with me for a while. Tolerate." Then he took off his armor and put it aside, used scissors to quickly cut off his shirt, and took out the needle bag for her. After Man Bao took the needle, he first pierced him with analgesic and hemostatic needles. After touching him and starting to relax, he took out a small knife and carefully cut it along the texture of his flesh. Lu Shenjun snorted twice. It wasn't very painful, but he felt that the flesh and blood on his chest was being cut open. Man Bao cut in with the arrow, and separated the flesh and blood according to the cross. After carefully separating the flesh and blood, he held the arrow and glanced at Lu Kenjun, who was sweating on his forehead, and said, "Don't be too nervous, too if you're nervous, the blood will flow faster." Lu Kenjun hummed softly, and before he had time to prepare, Zhou Man pulled out the arrow, and a burst of blood splattered Zhou Man's face, but Zhou Man didn't move and threw the arrow casually. When she went to the side, the military doctor on the side took the medicine bag and covered it the moment she pulled out the arrow. Zhou Man gave him a place and said, "Continue to cover, you must stop the bleeding." While letting Lu Shenjun relax, she drew a silver needle and pierced him, which was a pain-relieving needle for bleeding. After a long time, Lu Kenjun turned pale, and his body slowly relaxed. Seeing that the medicine bag was already red, the military doctor slowly removed the medicine bag. Most of the surging blood had stopped, but it was still bleeding slowly. Man Bao took the needle and thread and started sewing directly on the flying needle. Seeing her speed so fast, the military doctor couldn't help but open his mouth. Man Bao lowered his brows. Seeing that the amount of bleeding was less, he nodded with satisfaction and asked the military doctor to take a hemostatic wound medicine to apply. Man Bao directly took a sign to a soldier who was helping in the medical bill, and said, "Take the medicine from the second prescription and give him a drink." "Yes." The soldier took the sign and went down, and after a while, he brought the medicine up, and fed the army soldiers who were still somewhat conscious to take the medicine. Zhou Man had already gone to sew the belly of the person next to the bed, and the female student Chen Bangxia, who followed in, had red eyes, and said to Zhou Man a little ashamed, "Teacher, this knife is inserted, it's too deep, inside my organs seem to be injured too, I dare not." The other party's clothes have been cut by Chen Bangxia. It is estimated that after the inspection, she found that the situation was out of her ability, so she was carried by people to find her. While giving him a needle to stop the bleeding, Man Bao said, "Why are you crying, he's not dead yet." She said, "If you encounter this kind of injury in the future, stop the bleeding first and use acupuncture. Didn't I teach you the bleeding points for bleeding in various parts?" Man Bao pierced the needle and found that he was still bleeding. He glanced at the other party's face, opened his eyes and looked at him and said, "He can't do it, go get the blood transfusion device, and immediately check what blood type he is. Find blood." Chen Bangxia immediately turned around and ran out. Man Bao said to the cake, "Go and fetch water." After cleaning her hands, she looked at his wound, opened the opening with a knife, then reached into her right hand and began to grope in his stomach by feeling. After a while, She pinched the bleeding point. Down. Man Bao heaved a sigh of relief and stood still. After Chen Bangzia brought something, she would instruct her on how to test blood and find the source of the blood. They had learned this kind of thing more than once when they were in the imperial physician's office, but it was the first time she faced an injured patient who needed blood transfusion. She couldn't help but panic. At this moment, Zhou Man ordered her to move and slowly calmed down. When she calmed down, Man Bao said, "Go and get Zhou Liru, you can prepare candles, and I need to sew up his internal organs." Zhou Liru was more experienced and calmer than Chen Bangzia. Zhou Man asked her to be her assistant, while Chen Bangzia squatted aside holding a candle and was able to watch the whole thing. Lu Kenjun was in severe pain, and before he fell asleep, he tilted his head slightly and saw 3 women tumbling in his comrade's stomach, and then washed the part of the intestines that came out and stuffed it back into his stomach. Sew up layer by layer. He stared blankly, and couldn't help raising his eyelids slightly to look at his face. "Hey, it's Lao Tang." Lu joined the army for a moment of sadness. If he is injured like this, he should not be able to live, right? Zhou Man finished sewing, handed over the dressing and dressing to Chen Bangzia, then asked her to keep an eye on the blood transfusion and his situation, turned around and took Zhou Liru out. There was a commotion outside, and a group of wounded were carried down. She glanced at it, smashed. "Yes, those bastards threw stones from the city gate, this is still angry." Zhou Man asked them to be carried to another medical account for unified treatment, glanced at them, and ordered a few female students to go in and deal with them. Those who were smashed included arms, legs, back and front chest. Those hit in the head are basically dead on the spot. Those who hit the chest were sent here, and Zhou Man gave up after the examination. He could only give them a few injections, so that they would not be very painful to walk, and then go to save other wounded. Man Baoke treated a few more patients, and there was a commotion and cheers in front of him. A soldier ran past the medical tent and shouted loudly, great victory, we have taken Hongshan, we have taken Hongshan." There were also cheers from the wounded soldiers outside the hospital tent. Man Bao pursed his lips and smiled, feeling much more relaxed, then turned his head to Zhou Liru and said, "Go on, let the logistics side boil 10 more large quantities of the number 1 and number 2 prescriptions." He added, "Let them pay attention, there should be a large number of wounded soldiers sent from above, ready to receive. Let Wen Tiandong take people to divide the patients, and treat mild, moderate, and severe patients separately. Those who are seriously injured are sent to the hospital. From the account, you should pay attention to moderate patients." "Yes." Zhou Liru turned around and left. The army was victorious. Niu Shishi let people take over Hongshan County, and then let people clean the battlefield. Some of them found the wounded soldiers and sent them back, and counted the number of casualties. Those who should make up for the knife should be thrown into the prison camp. Only then did Niu Shishi come back to see the coach with some of his troops. "See you at 6 p.m. It's a bit busy during this time, and I have to do Qingming, so the update time is a bit difficult to fix. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2688. When passing by the medical account, I found that they directly occupied a piece of land for the boss, and the wounded soldiers in front were still being sent down. Niu Shishi couldn't help restraining his horse, and turned his head to glance. He saw a wounded soldier covered in blood being lifted from a stretcher. His face was pale, and he was lying unconscious. Niu Shishi was slightly surprised that such wounded soldiers generally gave up, and even carried them to the side, first to rescue those who were still alive. He looked up and found that the wounded soldiers were being carried, and some were supported by each other. and the medical account is more lively than ever, and there are more people coming and going. After thinking about it, he rode his horse over, not in a hurry to return to the main account. When Tiandong took a few soldiers to stand at the intersection, and could walk by himself, or if he was supported by someone, he glanced at the wound and pointed them to the location, "Go over there." He also quickly looked at the wound and was conscious. The bleeding was not particularly ferocious to the other side, and those who had lost consciousness, or those whose wounds were more dangerous, were sent to the doctor. "Over there." Niu Shishi got off the horse with the whip and was about to talk to him. When Tiandong couldn't see a healthy person at all, and the one who was not injured, only swept over him, but he didn't care at all, so he pushed Wen Tiandong as soon as he came up to him. Going to the side, he went up and glanced at the man on the stretcher, touched his neck, and found that he was still angry. He glanced at the blood-covered man, his eyes fixed on his arm, and asked, "Apart from the arm, what else is there? Where are you injured?" The person lying down was unconscious, and the person carrying it said, "I don't know, it seems that he injured his arm." When Tiandong nodded, turned his head and shouted, "Sumu, Chen Bangzia, there is a serious injury." Sumu was suturing someone's wound, but he couldn't get his hands out for a while. Chen Bangzia ran out, glanced at it, and said, "A blood transfusion is needed." She couldn't do it alone, so she turned around and ran, calling Zhou Liru, while going to get the blood transfusion device. When Tiandong said, "There is no room for the medical account, so put people on that table." Niu Shishi wanted to speak, but he couldn't open his mouth at all. When Tiandong received 4 more wounded soldiers who were leaning over each other. He looked at the wounds and found that they were all small wounds, so he pointed over there and said, "Go there." Side. Niu Shishi turned around and walked in. He happened to see 2 soldiers carrying the wounded soldier to a table, and then he saw the little girl who was always beside Zhou Lord take out scissors, and 3 or 2 then they cut all the clothes of the person, then took out the needle and pierced the person's body, and finally took out the saw. Another little girl stepped forward to help, and the 2 of them pulled the saw and sawed out the person's arm. Bullshit's eyes widened. The 2 little ladies threw the sawed hands into a basket, and then took the medicine bag to stop the bleeding. On the other side, a little lady held up a pole and stuck the needle in his arm. He knew that thing, I heard Zhao Qiagong mention it before, saying that this thing is very precious, and the entire Imperial Physician Office can't make a few pairs. The 3 little ladies divided the labor, one held the medicine bag to stop the bleeding, the other had a needle to stop the bleeding, and the other had a blood transfusion, and then sutured. The blood slowly stopped. But they did so much, and after the stitches, a little lady reached out and touched his pulse, her face changed slightly, and said, "No, he has no pulse." So they started to press on his chest, the 3 of them separated, one person did it for a while, back and forth. Bullthorn frowned, stepped forward, saw his lips turning white, couldn't help touching his neck, pursed his lips and said, "He is already dead." Zhou Liru ignored him and continued to press. The 3 of them took turns like this, and after about a quarter of an hour, the person actually had a pulse again. Niu Shishi opened his mouth in surprise. Zhou Liru let out a breath, turned his head and said to Chen Bangzia, "Quickly call the teacher, he won't be able to just take ready-made prescriptions. This person needs blood and qi, especially qi, as long as he can hold this breath, he can live." Chen Bangzia ran to find someone. Man Bao's hoodie was covered in blood, and he looked even worse than the soldiers who came down from the battlefield, and even a tight neck was stained with blood. She came out and saw the bullshit standing beside her, nodded at him, went to see the wounded soldier, checked the wound, and felt the pulse again. Knowing that he had just died, she lowered her eyes and thought for a while. "Go and get 6 coins of baked angelica, 5 coins of ginseng, 3 coins of dry ginger, and 3 coins of chuan xiang." Man Bao recited the prescription, and Chen Bangzia recited it according to it. After confirming that it was correct, he would go down to boil the medicine. Man Bao stopped her and said, "Take 2 ginseng pieces and give him a drink." Chen Bangzia responded and turned away. Only then did Man Bao look at Niu Shishi. Niu Shishi came to see wounded soldiers. Niu Shishi nodded quietly. Man Bao turned around and said, "Then let's go, I'll show you." Then she led him to the other side. Most of the people on that side were moderately injured. She didn't lead Niu Shishi around, but after she got there, she said, "Just take a look. Then deal with the wounded who are queuing for life." Even though there were 28 students under Man Bao, plus the original 2 military doctors, and the old, weak, sick, and disabled logistics soldiers who had helped in the medical bill, it was still not enough. After a war, there may not be many dead people, but there must be many injured people. Zibing followed Zhou Man with a medicine box, and Niu Shishi didn't leave. He just stood on the side and watched, and saw that they kept cutting clothes with scissors, or applying medicine to stop the bleeding, or sutured to stop the bleeding, and then poured water. A bowl of medicine, and some need to saw their legs and arms. For some, it is necessary to cut the meat that is turned out, and clean the dirt in the wound with tweezers or a knife little by little. Most of them are ladies, looking delicate, but when they scraped the flesh with a knife, their faces were covered in blood and did not change much. Chen Bangzia and the others thought that they were full of patients like this all day, and they would have changed a long time ago, but they would still panic when they encountered seriously injured patients. Niu Shishi stood on the side and looked, and finally turned to look on the other side. On the other side are the soldiers who were slightly injured. They stretched out their arms, and they were able to make fun of them while bandaging them. They made fun of the little ladies. "Little lady, you looked at my body, but you have to be responsible for me." The female student blushed, and when she applied the medicine, she pressed the wound hard, causing the other party to scream like a pig, and then bandage the wound. The soldier was so angry that he raised his hand and was about to beat her. Bullthorn kicked the man down with one foot, and shouted angrily, "I saved you and made a mistake. Apologize to the doctor soon." He turned his head and smiled at the little lady, and said a little ingratiatingly, "Don't mind little lady, these big olds have bad mouths, but they don't have bad intentions." The female student's eyes were slightly red, and she snorted, "I'm not afraid. Who is afraid of who? If you have the ability, don't get hurt next time, otherwise it will still fall into our hands, hum." She lifted the medicine cabinet and went to the next one. When Niu Shishi saw that she was gone, he stretched out his hand and patted the veteran's head. "If you have nothing to do, go over there and take a walk around the medical account, and look at your comrades whose arms and legs have been sawn off, you idiot. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2689. Niu Shishi looked around the busy medical account, and then turned around and strode toward his horse. He had to report to the main account to report the military situation. He had only run halfway when he met Zhao Qiagong and others who had brought people over. The entire main account moved forward. Niu Shishi immediately ran forward. "Zhao Shangshu, is the main account going to enter Hongshan County?" Zhao Qiagong shook his head. "Stay outside the city, send someone in to clean it up, and be careful of Goguryu's counterattack." He said, "His Majesty will be here in 2 days, and we must ensure that the city that has been captured is safe." Niu Shishi responded with excitement. Zhao Qiagong continued to go to Hongshan County, and when he was outside the city, he was the first to see the medical account. At this time, only the soldiers who were stationed in the city were left. Surrounded by the middle, Zhao Qiagong led the generals to see the wounded soldiers, but was also stunned by the students from the Imperial Physician's office. On the other hand, General Ashina was more familiar with the world, but he had to sigh with emotion. "Women are not allowed to be men." Then I looked at these scales, and I liked it even more. It would be good if there were so many doctors in the army during the Western expedition. At that time, although their team was full of weaks, the people who were rescued were far less than they are now. And the processing speed this time is much faster than that of the West expedition. When the sun went down, all the wounds had been dealt with. It was not like during the Western expedition, where they had to be busy until the next day to deal with them. Some of the wounded died of blood loss before they could be dealt with. However, although it has been dealt with, the death rate of seriously wounded soldiers is still not low. Man Bao mainly watched them, and set up several medical accounts to collect all the people for treatment. The other wounded soldiers also set up tents nearby to live in. Zhou Man asked Wen Tiandong to arrange the night patrol students and let them eat. Zhao Qiagong personally came to invite Zhou Man to the celebration banquet. After thinking about it, Man Bao went with Wen Tiandong and Zhou Liru. Wen Tiandong was also a student of Man Bao. He studied physical therapy, and Man Bao had taught him courses for 3 years. During this deployment, Imperial physician Zheng specially reserved 8 male students she was familiar with. Among them, Wen Tiandong is the most familiar with the students, and his methods are not weak, so Man Bao let Wen Tiandong manage all the students. Man Bao and Wen Tiandong said, "I will forget some things when I'm busy. Remember that our medicinal materials were shipped out of the capital in batches before, and there are several batches that just placed the order and haven't arrived yet. It will be checked and concocted and sent out. But the transportation is the responsibility of the Ministry of War, so we need to deal with the Ministry of War and the post stations in various places, especially the logistics in the army. We can't reach the post stations in various places, so we need to urge the logistics in the army. I will take you to see them, and this will happen in the future. You pay more attention. Man Bayadao, after the medicinal materials arrive, you and Liru and Pinelia should carefully count them. You are all familiar with the methods used by the students of the Imperial Physician Department to concoct medicinal materials, and the cooperating pharmacists are also fixed on those. Be careful when checking and let me know if you have any questions." She said, "The quality of the medicinal materials must be guaranteed. The medicinal materials are just a tiny bit different, and the medicinal properties are 1,000 miles away, so they should not be ignored." Wen Tiandong and Zhou Liru bowed as they should. Seeing Wen Tiandong's uneasy face, Man Bao sighed in his heart, but it was a pity that Zhenggu was not here. He was skilled at doing it. After all, he had been the little shopkeeper of Ji Shitang for several years. Or by Shanyan or by Erlang, they are also familiar. Man Bao thought of Bai Shan and Bai Erlang, so when he saw Zhao Qiagong, he asked, "When will the holy driver be here?" Zhao Qiagong said, "It's coming, it's coming." She refused to tell her the exact time, which is also a secret. Niu Shishi quietly approached the military doctor to speak. In fact, there is only one military doctor in the garrison in Yingzhou, and the other one is because of the war, so he sent someone to grab it from the medical center in the city. Every time the army fights, a lot of soldiers who shouldn't die because of the lack of military doctors. Bull Thornchi asked them and the battalion generals, "How about the casualties?" Now 286 people are killed, 595 people are injured, of which 128 people are seriously wounded. General Shen glanced at the 2 military doctors and said, "This is our own statistics, but the number of serious injuries counted by the medical bill is 68 people, and the other 60 people are classified as moderately injured and not counted as serious injuries." Niu Shishi looked at the military doctor, especially the old military doctor in his family. The old army doctor said, "Sir, this new Lord Zhou is very powerful. Like many wounded patients, we would not have treated them before, but this time they have accepted them, and they have all dealt with them." "Bullshit, how is the situation?" The old military doctor shook his head and said, "This is a serious injury. Even if he was alive at the time, it is difficult to be sure later. It will take at least 5 days to be sure. Maybe one of the high fever people will be gone. Niu Shishi stared at him with bright eyes and asked, "Then what do you think?" The old military doctor was silent for a while and then said, "They are 68 people who are seriously injured. Before that, we will not save a single one of the medical bills. We will save the 60 people who are slandered, but the survival rate is also low. 30% to 40%, but I now see that among the wounded soldiers they designated as serious injuries, there should be a 50% success rate. The most important thing is that they have more people, and many injuries can be treated in time, not to mention a more comprehensive and effective treatment this time." The old military doctor wiped his face and said, "Sir, in the past, when we dealt with wounded patients, we applied medicine to stop the bleeding, and then gave some medicine to stop the bleeding and replenish the blood. Whether we could survive depends on boiling. The most powerful medical skills are digging arrows and suturing." He said, "But now, the students of the Imperial Physician Department who come here, whoever they choose, can sew them up, scrape flesh, saw their legs and chop off their arms, and use acupuncture to stop bleeding. It is said that Sankai is added to the medicine, and it is said that 1 tael of gold and 1 tael of Sankai powder are added." Niu Shishi's heart is trembling. So much money. Not to mention the herbs such as angelica ginseng to nourish qi and blood. They have prepared a large box, and there are things that can be transfused to people who have lost blood. I just watched their recovery, and I think they can survive. At least twice as many people as we used to fight. Niu Shishi swallowed his saliva and said to him, "Learn more skills from others. Didn't you accept 2 apprentices? They have learned from you for so many years, but they still don't know how to sew meat. I think those little ladies sew. The meat is particularly good looking, and the bleeding stops very quickly. I figured it out myself, but they were taught by a famous teacher. Master Zhou said that the suture should also be based on the texture. Even the internal organs and blood vessels can be sutured, which is very particular." The old military doctor straightened his chest and said, "Zhou the Lord heard that I figured out the suture technique by myself, and even praised me for being so good that I can figure it out without anyone's guidance, and there are not many doctors in the world. See you tomorrow." Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2690. Man Bao first came into contact with ulcer Dr. Mr. Mo. He has very rich theoretical knowledge, and later he studied with Fan Tai, especially Fan Tai. He has reached perfection in suture, so Man Bao has a very systematic learning from the beginning. And there is an anthropomorphic model simulation operation, which is what it is now. If there is no such thing, let her figure it out by herself. I am afraid it will be difficult to figure out this, so she admires the old military doctor very much. The greed in Niu Shishi's heart kept popping up, and he quietly looked at Zhou Man and the 2 students beside her, with a light in his eyes. There are so many good doctors, if you can keep 2. The old military doctor said to him directly, "Don't think about it, these are all students of the Imperial Medical Office. I heard that after graduation, they will enter the Imperial College Hospital or local medical offices. They are much nobler than our military doctors. Who would come to the army to be a military doctor? Otherwise, does Niu Shishi need to go to the medical hall to coerce and lure him, and finally bind a doctor to come and act as a military doctor? The fresh military doctor who has been silent all the time. The survival rate of the wounded soldiers was even higher than the old military doctor and Niu Shishi expected. The survival rate of seriously wounded soldiers reached 80%. That is to say, 4 out of 5 people survived. Of course, this is only the 2nd day. Man Bao took the students to change their pulse and medicine, and said to Niu Bishishi who came to see the situation, "There were 13 people who didn't survive last night." Niu Shishi nodded and said, "It's already very good. If the 2 military doctors in his army dealt with them, these people would not be saved at all. If they were saved, most of them would have died on the spot. He saw Lu Jianjun lying on the hospital bed and stepped forward to look at him. How is he? Can he live? Army Corps. Zhou Man stepped forward to look at his condition, nodded slightly and said, he is recovering well. He had a low-grade fever last night, and the wound has not deteriorated today. The medication works well. The golden sore medicine they use is good, with noto ginseng powder added to it. Some people are not sensitive to this medicine, and the wound is still red. If it cannot kill the external evil, it will invade the human body. And some people accept this medicine well. It can not only stop bleeding and disinfect exogenous pathogens very well, but also make the wound recover quickly. Therefore, they need to constantly change the medicine according to the patient's condition. Obviously, Lu Shenjun is lucky. He belongs to the group of people who are very good at medicine. Lu Shenjun still felt a pain in his heart at this moment. Taking advantage of the doctor's presence, he quickly asked, have I hurt my heart? Man Bao said to him, you're lucky, you're still a little short, so no. The old military doctor on the side immediately said, Master Zhou is also good at medicine. If someone else came to draw the arrow, it would have been uninjured at the time, but it would have been injured when it was pulled out. Moreover, the arrow has barbs and is highly lethal. Most people can't protect the adult. Of course, Lu Shenjun also knows that those who are shot in the chest and abdomen by this arrow will basically bleed out when they are pulled out, and will not survive. However, he felt that his injury was far worse than that of Lao Tang next door. Seeing that Zhou Man was going to check other injuries, he quietly said to Niubishi Shi, Sir, Lao Tang's stomach has been opened, and his intestines have leaked out, blood is pouring out, I don't see him moving at all, is it? Niu Shishi glanced at the old soup next to him. This is an old oil, 100 households. I didn't expect that he would also be opened. Niu Shishi was deeply impressed by him. Although he did greasy work, he was okay in fighting, so Niu Shishi went to Zhou Man to ask about the situation. Man Bao sighed, his condition is not very good, and his internal organs are injured. If he can survive the first 5 days, he will be alive. She glanced at Niu Shishi and said, that's why I said that the success rate can't be calculated yet. Whether people can really survive will have to wait until the day they can pay the medical bills. Niu Shishi is eager to get military merit. Now the number of people who died on the battlefield in Goguryeo has been counted, and the city is also called for them to occupy, so he will wait for the number of casualties on his side. If this data is low, then he will show his face in front of the emperor. So he is in a hurry. The emperor came within 2 days, so he smiled at Zhou Man, can Master Zhou give me an accurate number now? No, Man Bao said, at least half a month later. She knew that the pensions for soldiers who died on the battlefield were different from those who died on the battlefield. All soldiers who were injured in battle and could not be treated were considered dead in battle. If she reported it here, those who died later would only be considered wounded soldiers, and the pensions given by the imperial court were different. Man Bao glanced at him. During the Western expedition in the Western regions, some wounded soldiers who felt that they could not survive begged her to report their injuries to be more serious, so that they died after a period of time. So she knows this. Bullthorn history. A colonel rushed over, Sir, the chief manager asked you to pick up the car, saying that the holy car has arrived. Man Bao's eyes brightened, oh, Bai Shan and the others are here. Niu Shishi did not expect the emperor to come so quickly, so he trotted out quickly. The emperor brought the remaining 6,000 forbidden troops, and the holy car entered the city directly. He lived directly in the county government of Hongshan County, and then the emperor began to inspect Hongshan County, appease the people, and then went out of the city to console the soldiers. Then he went to the hospital to see the wounded. Man Bao went to the reception. Seeing so many wounded soldiers, the emperor sighed sadly, but after walking around and asking about the wounds on everyone's body, The emperor's worry was much lighter, and the serious wounds were all saved. Things seemed to be better than he expected. Not all the wounded soldiers were left in the hospital account. Basically, most of the wounded soldiers suffered minor injuries, even if they were slashed by a knife or had a broken bone, they were considered minor injuries here. The wound was bandaged, and after the bone was set, some medicine was given and the person was sent back to his tent. What remained were basically the serious injuries judged by the military doctors. In Zhou Man's case, it was considered a moderate injury, and they needed to monitor vital signs at all times. The emperor walked around and was very satisfied. He felt that he brought the people from the imperial physician's office here this time. He and Zhou Man smiled and said, "Zhou Qing has worked hard these days." Man Bao bowed and replied, "This is the responsibility of the minister." She paused and said, "Your Majesty, we have used a lot of the first batch of wound medicines delivered to Yingzhou, but we don't know where the second batch has arrived, but they have been missing for a long time. The medicine will consume too much. It is impossible for the army not to attack because the medicinal materials are not available. After all, nearly 70,000 soldiers and horses are here, and they don't know how much food and grass they will consume in a day." The emperor originally thought of a quick battle, so he turned back and ordered Zhao Qiuagong, "Let people go along the Inn to urge them, and the logistics of the Ministry of War transporting the medicinal materials will come first, and they must not be blocked. This is related to the life and death of our 70,000 soldiers." Zhao Qiuagong immediately responded. The emperor snorted coldly and said, "If there are local officials who do something illegal, they can be executed first and then scolded." For the eastward expedition, he had spent half of the national treasury, and he didn't know where to ask for the money in the spring of next year, so whoever hindered his eastward expedition at this time would be his enemy. See you at 7. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2691. After passing the checkpoint, the Ministry of War logistics in charge of escorting the medicinal materials turned around and snorted, waving the whip and shouting, "Hurry up and hurry, the front line is already fighting. If the hour is missed, everyone should not think about it." The coolies pushing the cart snorted in their hearts, saying that it was because they were delayed. "Isn't it because you couldn't get out of the checkpoint and wasted time?" The person in charge of escorting the things was also very angry. He shouted at everyone to hurry, and complained to his colleagues, it should be escorted with the grain and grass, and the medicinal materials should be escorted separately. Not to mention the waste of energy, there are still so many fuel users on the road, and they are stuck on it. The Yan, there is no oil and water underneath, and we are not even allowed to exit the level. Either there is a problem here or there is a problem, and the problem is all on us. Okay, don't complain. Isn't this the official document above? I heard that I have greeted the post stations and local officials along the way. No one should dare to stop us later. In other words, it sounds good. How many years have we been on this road? Those who have become essential oil users, they only have money in their eyes, and where is their life? He complained. The side of the military is in charge of it. Yu Yan, I heard that the last batch of medicinal materials sent to the front line, they not only checked the quantity, some medicinal materials, whether they were concocted by their imperial physician department, smell it, and see it. Let them want to replace some, they can't. Of course, they don't want to replace it, but some gas guzzling on the road is particularly difficult to pass, and they have to pay something for the convenience of the road. He felt very tired, and it took more energy to escort the items from the imperial physician's office than to escort food and grass 5 times. At this time, Wen Tiandong was also reporting the situation to Zhou Man. "Teacher, what to do with the 2 boxes of medicinal materials that have been replaced?" Man Baidao, Write it down first. I will pick out a few students who are good at concocting medicinal materials tomorrow to deal with it. After thinking about it, Man Bao said, I remember that Chen Bangxia and Su Ye did well in the concoction class. Wen Tiandong smiled embarrassedly. He was in a different class from them, so he didn't know their grades. However, Chen Bangxia's grades were good. He was among the best in several exams, and they were all from the same group of students. He still knew it. But the most powerful is Zhou Liruo. After Zheng Gu graduated from a group of well-established people, her total score has always been in the top 3, and she has been able to overwhelm him several times. Man Bao said, let Chen Bangxia and Su Ye take a few people to deal with them, and try to concoct the medicinal materials. Wen Tiandong hesitated for a while, but still said, there is a box of astragalus, and some of the bottom is damp and moldy. Man Bao's face was tense, and he pursed his lips unhappily, and finally suppressed his temper. Pick it out and throw it away. No, bring it to me. Seeing that she didn't lose her temper, Wen Tiandong breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly asked, how do I make this box of huangqi? Honey moxibustion. Most of the wounded soldiers on the battlefield are related to blood loss. Honey moxibustion huangqi can replenish the middle and replenish qi. Man Bao said in a deep sigh, write a letter and tell the imperial physician's office that the huangqi in the next batch of medicinal materials must have 7 cheng is honey moxibustion. Yes, Wen Tiandong bowed and walked out after writing it down. When he got out of the tent, he saw Bai Shan standing outside with his hands behind his back. He was startled, and hurriedly bowed his head in a salute, and said respectfully, Master. A smile flashed in Bai Shan's eyes. He nodded to him, took a step back and said with a smile, go get busy. Wen Tiandong breathed a sigh of relief and left quickly. Bai Shan opened the curtain and went in. Man Bao was unhappy in his heart, but he couldn't help but smile when he saw him, got up to meet him. I didn't see you by your Majesty's side. Bai Shan smiled and said, I'm off to handle official business with someone, and I'll come over as soon as I'm done. He reached out and touched her brow, trying to smooth it out. Why are you so angry? Man Bao grabbed his hand, turned around and sat on the chair and said, don't mention it. We went to count the first batch of medicinal materials sent yesterday, and 2 boxes of them were replaced. The quantity is not bad, but there is 1 box of baking angelica and honey moxibustion astragalus were replaced by raw medicinal materials. Bai Shan frowned. The processed medicinal materials and raw medicinal materials have different values, and the medicinal properties are also very different, and some raw medicinal materials are even poisonous. Man Bayadao, the raw medicinal materials and the processed medicinal materials are used differently and have different effects. Fortunately, Wen Tiandong and the others checked carefully. Those people put a layer of processed medicinal materials on top, and the bottom is full of raw materials. The herbs, the ones listed on the list, are also processed. If the person who prescribes the medicine doesn't pay attention, they will use the raw herbs as processed. Man Bao gritted his teeth. Huang Qishans can be used to protect and strengthen the table, diuresis and swelling, toxins and muscle regeneration, while honey moxibustion can nourish the middle and replenish qi, treat internal injuries and blood metrorrhagia, and the effect and usage are completely different. Bai Shan frowned and asked, can I report it? Man Bao sneered, there are at least 4 batches of medicinal materials in the back. Wen Tiandong asked the escort and said that if there is no benefit on the way, the medicinal materials will not be delivered at all. I don't care if what they say is true. If it's fake, write it down in advance and settle accounts later in the fall. Bai Shan nodded. It is true that fighting is the most important thing at this time. As long as 1 batch of these 4 batches of medicinal materials is not delivered in time, you will be short of medicines. Man Bao nodded, but I'm not a vegetarian either. I've already complained to His Majesty. Zhou Man is not a vegetarian, and of course the Emperor is not either. Although what she said was obscure and did not make a clear complaint, but just after the battle, not many people were injured, and it was time to urgently need the second batch of medicine. There must be a problem with the first batch of medicines, so she was in trouble with the second batch of medicines. So the emperor couldn't help but turned his head and asked Zhao Qiuagong, "Is there a problem with the food and grass?" Zhao Qiuagong said, "Don't worry, your majesty, I'm watching, I don't dare to go too far, and this is not the time to investigate. Grain and grass have to be collected from the local area." Zhao Qiuagong said, "If your majesty is unhappy, it will be done later, but at this time, stability is the main thing." The emperor nodded and said with a sullen face, "As long as they don't go too far, I will turn one eye and close the other. Nothing matters at this time." Zhao Qiuagong knew that it was because of Zhou Man's complaint today. He smiled and said, "Your Majesty, Lord Zhou is still young, and the wind is smooth." The emperor asked, "What grievance did she suffer?" "Her medicinal materials were detained in the place." "It's not buckled." Zhao Qiuagong's smile faded, and he said, "Perhaps they also know that Lord Zhou is a celebrity in front of His Majesty, so they didn't dare to go too far, and only changed her 2 boxes of medicines, but I heard that she also I was so angry that when I first checked it out, I kicked the box and locked the escort, and it took me a long time to let him go." Naturally, what happened in the army could not be concealed from Duke Zhao. Quan saw if he wanted to let people know that he knew. Obviously, he pretended to be deaf and dumb in this matter, and obviously did not want to make a big fuss. See you at 10 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2692. The emperor snorted coldly. The soldiers fought bloody battles on the front lines, and they dared to exchange life-saving medicinal materials later. The emperor closed his eyes, and when he reopened it, he calmed down a lot. He said, "Give the capital news, and let the Ministry of Household and the Ministry of War pay more attention to the situation of the stations along the way. No one is allowed to move food, grass, military equipment, and medicinal materials, or I will cut them down. Their claws." Zhao Qiuagong responded quickly. The emperor said, "Get ready, we should take Liaodong city." Zhao Qiuagong was excited and responded with a yes. The emperor thought, Feng Liang and the others should have also arrived at Baixia city at this time, right? I don't know if I can get it. Feng Liang was attacking Baixia city. They were surprised. After landing, they took several places. They pushed the front line all the way to Baixia city, and then they began to besiege the city. Feng Shangshu stared at the map and said to his men, "On the 10th day, Baixia city must be captured, otherwise we will run out of food and grass, and their reinforcements are likely to arrive, and it will be even more difficult to fight later." Once they captured Baixia city, they could go to Liaodong city and attack Goguryeo from north to south with Emperor Zhao Qiuagong. One person said, "I don't know how Baikya and Silla are preparing. Speaking of which, the envoys left so long before us, why should we convince Silla and Baikya at this moment? Who knows, leave them alone, even without Baikya and Silla, we can still take Goguryeo, and our casualties this time are not big. Yes, I just went to the doctor's account to check it out. The imperial physicians in the imperial hospital are different from the military physicians in the army. Dr. Zheng's medical skills are very good. I can see that 2 of those seriously injured can save 1, and those who are slightly injured can be saved. Yes, almost all survived." Feng Shangguan put away the official document expressionlessly, thinking coldly in his heart, "That's because you haven't seen Zhou Man, that's how good your medical skills are, and if your stomach is broken, you can sew it up, that's amazing. Feng Shangshu, go on, let the veterans be more polite. Those who follow Imperial Physician Zheng are still students. They are tender-skinned. Don't make people angry. They have to rely on people to save their lives later." Yes. Man Bao and Bai Shan ate together. Now is the truce, and she has hot dishes and steamed buns to eat. Bai Shan does not live outside the city now, but lives in the city with the emperor. Although it is not far away, he is too lazy to go back to eat. Man Bao gave him 2 steamed buns, and the 2 of them ate together. What about Bai Er and Lu Huan? They are busy, Bai Shan said. Both of them are currently in charge of logistics, and there are many things to do. I also want to call Bai Erlang over to Man Bao, who manages logistics for her. Bai Shan seemed to know what she was thinking, and said, "You can ask your majesty to ask Bai Er, with him, you can better deal with the army, that is, the local post stations and officials. I heard that he is in charge of this matter, and also be careful about 1 or 2. Your majesty is willing to give it? Bai Shan, try it." So Man Bao went into the city the next day to find the emperor. She was the chief officer of the imperial physician's office on this expedition. The emperor was about to go out with Zhao Qiuagong and the others to survey the terrain, and when he met her, he asked, "Have the wounded soldiers been dealt with?" Man Bao nodded, "A person died yesterday. The wound worsened, he developed a high fever, and could not be saved." Suye, who was in charge of him, cried so much that his eyes were swollen. Man Bao followed behind him and walked out. Seeing the guards bringing their horses over, he couldn't help but ask, "Your Majesty, what are you doing here?" The emperor got on his horse and pointed to Bai Shan behind him and said, "I'm going to survey the terrain. If you have anything, please tell Bai Shan." "It's you I'm looking for," Man Bao said without fuss, "I want to ask you for someone." The emperor looked down at her and asked, "Who?" Without waiting for Zhou Man to speak, he said, "Bai Shan can't do it, I have a lot of things that I need him to do, so I can't leave him for now." Of course, Man Bao knew that Bai Shan was dying. The military information and documents sent from various places had to be handled by him, and then presented to the emperor. She said, "I want the concubine to take care of the logistics for me." The emperor was stunned and asked, "Bai Chang?" Man Bao nodded. The emperor frowned, "The logistics of your imperial physician should be familiar with medicinal materials, right? Can he do it?" Man Bao immediately said, "He can do it, His Majesty can rest assured, he is my junior brother, he has also been in contact with medicinal materials since I was a primary school doctor, and he has often prescribed medicine for me, so he knows most of the medicinal materials, and he is not responsible for it alone. I will ask my student Ben Tiandong to be his deputy." The emperor raised his eyebrows, thought about it and nodded, "All right, okay, then you can take him with you." Man Bao couldn't help laughing happily, bowed to the emperor and stepped aside to let him go. The emperor beat the horse and left. Zhao Qiuagong and Zhou Man smiled and left. Man Bao blinked at Bai Shan who was on the horse. Bai Shan smiled back at her and went after the emperor with a smile. They went to survey the terrain. Man Bao turned around and ran to find Bai Erlang. Bai Erlang is struggling to count the armaments in the warehouse, but there are also many problems with these armaments. The key is that he doesn't understand them. There are many problems with armaments, but he can't see them. He is very bald these days. The way the others looked at him was wrong. Like he's a soft eater. Well, although he is a soft eater, he is not without skills at all, but, how does he know that the gun head looks so hard and the appearance is not damaged, but it is unqualified? Bai Er. Bai Erlang turned around with the book, and responded sullenly, "You come to see me." Man Bao entered the warehouse, looked left and right, waved his hand in front of his nose, and asked, "Why does it smell so bad?" "The taste of iron." Man Bao. She glanced at the booklet without a few words on his hand, and simply reached out and pulled it. "Don't memorize it, let's go, you are mine now." Bai Erlang grabbed the booklet and said, "Why am I yours? I don't have time to help, the things in the armory are enough to give me a headache, unless I can figure out some swords, halberds, and bows and arrows one day, or I will help not you." Man Bao squinted at him, who said you were asked to help for nothing. Your Majesty and I asked for you, and His Majesty has already agreed. Now you don't have to manage the armament depot, you have to take care of the logistics of my Imperial Physician's office. Bai Erlang was stunned for a moment and then asked in surprise, really? Man Bao nodded. Bai Erlang looked up to the sky and laughed, as expected, the sky will not kill me. He turned around and ran out, stuffing the booklet and pen in his hand to a captain. He smiled and said, give it back to you, the armament depot is no longer under my control, there will be a period later. Man Bao came out behind him, smiled at the confused captain, and said, General, forgive me, my junior brother is more lively. Then he said to Bai Er, let's go, concubine. See you tomorrow. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2693. Bai Erlang left with her in a good mood. In order to facilitate management, he also went to his room to pack up his baggage and left with his 2 guards. Oh, they were given to him by Mingda, just to protect Bai Erlang's safety. He is going to live in the hospital account. He handed the burden to the guards, and when he walked out of the city with Man Bao, he almost burst into tears. You don't know how difficult it is to manage the armament depot, I don't want to do it at all, but Bai Shan said that this is the easiest. If this is also not possible, Your Majesty will definitely be angry. Although it's here to get credit, but you can't really be a fool without doing anything, right? Man Bao also complained to him, the medical bills are not easy to manage. This East expedition is different from the last West expedition. She said, during the Western expedition, General Ashina's people will take care of the supply and logistics. We only care about treating illnesses and saving people. What kind of medicine is there? But here, we have to take care of everything ourselves, and the benefit is our medicine. There are many more, and the medicine to be used will not be exhausted, the disadvantages will be too many, and you will know when you go. Alas, my heart is tired. Man Bao said, when the medical bills arrive, you have to help me. Bai Erlang was no stranger to this. He and Bai Shanyan or Lu Huan helped to manage this during the Western expedition. He was familiar with registering and arranging medicinal materials. He can also apply medicine, bandage, and hand out knives. Generally, it is not difficult for him to deal with minor injuries. Bai Erlang rolled his eyes and asked, would you like to call Lu Huan too? Man Bao shook his head and refused. He's from the Ministry of Industry. He has a serious job here. My temple is not big, and I don't need so many talents. Lu Huan has a boss, and everyone obeys orders. Unlike Bai Erlang, who is outside the staff, it is because the emperor wants him to make meritorious deeds, so he is only brought out of the Hanlin Academy. You can move it wherever you need it, so there is no psychological burden for Man Bao to use him. The 2 rode back to the hospital account. Man Bao took him directly to the pharmacy, and called Wen Tiandong over. By the way, although you both know each other, let me introduce again. This is Bai Hanlin. He is in charge of the logistics. Wen Tiandong, you assist him. Wen Tiandong responded respectfully, and breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. The teacher was still very good. Their medicinal materials were changed. Bai Erlang walked around the pharmacy and the back warehouse, and was surprised, so many medicinal materials? Is it just the first batch? Man Bao nodded. Bai Erlang was speechless. I remember that during the Western expedition, there were only so many medicinal materials for the entire army, right? Man Baodao, this time, our Imperial Physician's office has prepared in advance. Not only has the Ministry of Household allocated $5 million alone, but also the Queen and the others have raised more than $10 million, which is much more than the medicine cost during the Western expedition. In the past, when the army was launched, the medicine cost was saved from the food and grass provided by the Ministry of Household to the army. Basically, they were all wound medicines to stop bleeding and nourish blood, and there were no more. It is also because the preparation of medicinal materials this time is complete, so the survival rate of the soldiers is so high. Bai Erlang went over with the list and asked, when will the next batch of medicinal materials arrive? Man Bao shook his head, on the way, there is no news for now. The next battle is not far away, these should be enough, right? Looking at the number of casualties, I hope your majesty will cherish their lives. The emperor was taking his generals to investigate the terrain on the spot, and he also wanted to take Liaodong city at the least cost. He stood on the high ground and looked in the direction of Liaodong city, and said to Zhao Qiagong, tomorrow, we will send troops to surround Liaodong city, and invite the garrison of Gamu city to come to aid, and we can set up an ambush here. Zhao Qiagong also thought that this place was very suitable for setting up an ambush, and said, it can also lead the troops and horses of Liaodong city. We won Xiando and Hungshan, time is fast, they will definitely want to fight back, if we lose once. Ashina said immediately, I would like to be the bait. The emperor nodded with satisfaction and said with a smile, okay, you can go. Since they were going to feign defeat, the military doctors would not be able to come forward too much, at least not in large numbers, so Zhou Man only ordered 8 students with good riding skills, 4 male students, 4 female students, and 9 back. With the medicine box and the old military doctor with the army. The army was stationed at a distance of 40 kilometers from Liaodong city. When General Ashina and the others went to besiege the city, they stayed behind with the rest of the troops and horses. Stood on tiptoe and looked towards Liaodong city. General Ashina led the people to fight under the city gate. The people in Liaodong city couldn't stand it. They opened the city gate, and a general led the troops out to fight with General Ashina. After fighting for an hour, they rushed to kill twice. The opponent may find that they can't win, and General Ashina can't kill them all or attack the city, so Ming Jin withdraws his troops. After the garrison troops in Liaodong city retreated to the city, General Ashina had them only chased and killed for a while, and when the arrows on the city gate were shot down, they immediately retreated and also retreated. Of course, when they were evacuated, the bodies and wounded soldiers that could be pulled away were pulled away. When Man Bao heard the sound, he turned around and got on his horse, let's go, go back. They ran back, and some soldiers had come back in advance to inform them that they shouted, the general has withdrawn his troops. So the medical account and the kitchen were busy at the same time. Man Bao dismounted, and ordered, prepare 2 more pots, boil the hot water, and now start to boil the medicine, are the medicine bags ready? Zhou Liru followed behind and said, everything is ready. Man Bao nodded, let Wen Tiandong deal with the injuries. The soldiers brought back the corpses and wounded soldiers one after another, put the dead ones aside, and carried those who were still angry to the hospital tent. General Ashina wiped his face and began to count the number of people. At the same time, people were asked to stare at Liaodong city to see if anyone over there came out to clean the battlefield. There are still many knife wounds and arrow wounds, but this time the proportion of arrow wounds is relatively large. Fortunately, not all arrows have barbs. Man Bao breathed a sigh of relief and asked everyone to prepare for the operation. It has already been experienced once, and this time the students are in an orderly manner, at least their faces will not be pale. Man Bao took out the arrow, and immediately pressed the medicine bag on the wound, pressed it with one hand, and took a needle with the other hand to stop the bleeding. After a while, he picked up the medicine bag and began to suture him to stop the bleeding. Zibing went to deal with the minor injury, and Man Bao is now alone again. Wen Tiandong also came to help after the patients were divided. The most lively thing at the moment was the medical bills. They were busy until the afternoon to treat all the wounded. After washing their hands, they squatted in the camp with steamed buns to eat while watching them deal with the bodies. Those killed in battle should put away their wooden signs and return to their families together with their pensions. The corpses were burned, most of them were turned into ashes to nourish the land, and some of them had fellow villagers. They would bring a handful back to their families. See you at 6 p.m. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2694. General Ashina walked over and asked Joe Man to go back to the camp to open a small stove together. After thinking about it for a while, Man Bao gave Zhou Liru the uneaten one left in his hand, got up and went with him. She sat opposite him and said to him, "I'm dirty, please don't mind the general." General Ashina glanced at the blood splattered on her sleeves, and smiled indifferently. "Lord Zhou is polite, if you want to talk about dirty, you can't compare to me waiting to fight on these battlefields, Lord Zhou. I don't even despise us, how can I dare to despise adults?" General Ashina personally served Zhou Man a bowl of broth. Why didn't Lord Zhou enter the tent to eat? With Zhou Man's grade, of course she also has a small stove. Man Bao shook his head and said, "I'm so tired, I don't have a good appetite. When I see more flesh and blood, I don't want to eat too much." Zhou Man, who had a bad appetite, drank a bowl of broth, ate 3 steamed buns from General Ashina, and divided him half a plate of meat and 2 half plates of vegetables. General Ashina. After Man Bao finished eating, he put down his bowl and chopsticks, lowered his hands, and gently performed finger exercises under the table. Digging for arrows was also a delicate task. "General, how long will this battle last?" General Ashina shook his head and said, "Not necessarily, the city of Liaodong is high and difficult to attack, and there are surrounding cities that are horns of each other." Man Bao stared. "It's going to be winter." General Ashina said indifferently, "Don't worry, the Ministry of Household is already preparing winter clothes. In terms of supplies, they can't compare to our great Jin." Man Bao frowned, "But we are attacking from a distant army, and we can't compare to them taking advantage of the land." The corners of General Ashina's mouth twitched slightly and said, "There are many enemies who think the same as Lord Zhou." Man Bao. She always felt that General Ashina was mocking her because she could hear him mocking the enemy. Man Bao reached out and poured himself a bowl of tea to drink. General Ashina said, "Don't worry, Lord Zhou, we will protect the medical account, and please take care of Lord Zhou in the future." Man Bao raised his bowl and said, "General is polite." General Ashina and Zhou Man touched bowls. General Ashina and Zhou Man passed their breath and began to attack the city wholeheartedly. He grasped the rhythm very well. Every day, he went to the city to scold, and waited for someone to come out to fight for a while. Most of the time, there was no result. The soldiers who dragged dozens of casualties came back, and the casualties on the opposite side were greater than them. 3 days later, General Ashina took fewer people to the city to scold, but they asked the doctor to prepare more hot water and medicine bags. Man Bao knew there was going to be a war, so they went out in the morning and began to prepare. In less than 2 hours, they vaguely heard the sound of drums and rushing. Man Bao jumped up from the spot, ran to a nearby high ground to step on her feet and looked into the distance. She saw that there seemed to be shouts of killing on the high ground where she was standing a few days ago. Man Bao turned around and said happily to Wen Tiandong, "Get ready to meet the wounded soldiers." The garrison in Liaodong city fell down. What Zhou Man didn't know was that not only the garrison in Liaodong city was subdued, but also the reinforcements from Gamu city. Zhao Qiuagong personally led people to set up an ambush on the road, captured the people who came out of the city in one fell swoop, and then led the army directly. "Go and attack the city of Jim." When the matter was reported to Man Bao thought about it for a while, ordered Zhou Liru and Wen Tiandong, asked them to bring some students to do the medical billing, and then transferred the old military doctor back to manage the remaining students. Who knows when the emperor will divide his troops to attack and where, he has to keep some people. Man Bao sent some other students here. This time, the number of wounded soldiers was much more. Of course, they also gained more. All the Goguryeo troops who went out of the city to pursue General AncientChina were basically captured and beheaded. The barracks was noisy. It was not until late at night that Man Bao led someone to deal with all the wounded soldiers, and then General AncientChina's lieutenant came over to invite Zhou Man and others to see the captives of Goguryeo. Man Bao raised his eyebrows, brought people over, and treated them like the soldiers of Dajin. She was busy until the early morning. When it was almost dawn, she let the students go back to rest. She planned to take a while to check the situation of the wounded soldiers. After this night, the hatred of the prisoners in the prison camp for Dajin faded. General AncientChina stood there watching. Man Bao walked out, looked back, and asked General AncientChina, "Are you trying to subdue Dajin?" "Are they?" General AncientChina said coldly, "This is what your Majesty meant, and there is no need to deliberately subdue them, but they are also the people of Dajin." Man Bao twitched the corners of his mouth and did not speak. To the emperor, all places that were once part of the Central Plains belonged to Dajin. What's more, Goguryeo was also a vassal of Dajin. General AncientChina said indifferently, "For ordinary soldiers, they only need to live, they can survive, as long as they live like a human being, and when they live like a human being, they want a better life, these Majesty. I can give it to them, so don't worry. As for those generals, if they are not obedient, just kill them, they don't need to be subdued." Man Bao understood, and he didn't have to worry too much about the generals who had come as prisoners. Man Bao asked, "Don't you use their confessions? Maybe lure the enemy into attacking a city or something?" General AncientChina shook his head, "The Goguryeo people are cunning, so there is no need to make excuses with them. Your Majesty has a good plan." Man Bao no longer asked, "Isn't the emperor's good policy what you want?" She turned to leave, first drank a bowl of soup, nibbled 2 steamed buns, washed her face with cold water, and then went to see the injured. After changing a few prescriptions, they were stared at, and she turned and went to sleep. But she was exhausted. "It seems that we still have to leave 2 students on duty in the future, and we can't go all out. I don't know how long this eastern expedition will last, but it's better not to exhaust them." After Man Bao woke up, there were shouts and laughter outside. She washed her face, rubbed some moisturizing cream, and went out. She saw everyone surrounded by a group, 2 whose soldiers were wrestling in the middle, and the people around were shouting. Even her female students looked delicious. When they saw the teacher coming, they immediately came to say hello. Man Bao stood with his hands up and asked, "Why did you fall down?" "There are also weapons to compare," Suye said with a smile. General AncientChina asked people to compare, and whoever won, rewarded 10 money. Man Bao said, "Wow, so generous." Man Bao looked around and slowly pondered over it. Although it was only after the battle, his morale seemed to be very high. The morale is indeed high. First, they have not been defeated for the time being after they came out. Second, they have already captured 2 cities, and this time the casualties are not large. Third, there are medical accounts. The survival rate of the wounded soldiers is higher than ever before. Fourth, there are female students from the Imperial Physician's office. During this time, clutching his stomach, clutching his arms and legs and shouting pain, there were many people who went to the doctor's account and wanted to get medicine. General AncientChina also had bad intentions, so he let the unmarried soldiers wrestle, compete in martial arts, be generous and strong in front of the girls, and if they could marry them back to Hyuti. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2695. The Duke of Zhao first captured the city of Gaimu, and the time was faster than the emperor expected, and it only took 5 days. The morale was high, and even the people and tribes of Liaodong came in groups, kneeling and begging the emperor to recruit them into the army to attack Goguryeo together. Although the emperor was very moved, he still refused, and after appeasing them, let them go home. But this makes morale even higher. Morale is a very mysterious thing. If one is good, it will be good with other aspects. And one after another disappeared, and there was a downturn in Goguryeo. As soon as Gamu city was captured, the reinforcements from Liaodong city were cut off, more than 20,000 people were captured, and more than 100,000 stone of food were captured, which directly relieved the pressure on the Ministry of Households and the Ministry of War. The emperor was delighted, so he sent more soldiers to surround Liaodong city. The other students from the imperial physician's office also followed the army. Liaodong city was in critical condition, and news came out that Goguryeo sent 40,000 troops to rescue them. They needed to go to Gamu city. The emperor asked Zhao Qiagong, Li Si, and others to ambush them, and they won these 40,000 people without waiting for anyone to pass Gamu city. Then both sides attacked together. Zhao Qiagong and General AncientChina captured Liaodong city together. When Liaodong city was captured, the Goguryeo portal opened wide. At the same time, good news came from the south that Feng Shangshu captured Baisha city and was heading towards Liaodong city. The emperor led an army into Liaodong city. He looked at the hanging map and pondered. Zhao Qiagong said, "Your Majesty, the sky is about to get cold." The emperor put his hands together and did not speak. General AncientChina said, "Your Majesty, I am not afraid of the cold." Zhao Qiagong, Li Si, and other generals glanced at him and said nothing. Of course he wasn't afraid anymore. The Hujun he brought with him was good at fighting in severe cold, but Dajan's troops were not good enough. At this time, fighting was very expensive. Zhao Qiagong said, "Your Majesty, we can fight for another month at most. It will snow in a month, and the road will not be easy to walk." The emperor frowned and said, "If you can't capture Goguryeo, this dispatch of troops will not count as a victory." The emperor was a little anxious, and he didn't have much time. This time, he had won the royal expedition for many years before the ministers agreed. "I'm afraid there will be no chance after this time. Moreover, the war cost a lot after this time. It would be difficult to use troops on Goguryeo on a large scale." The emperor squeezed his fist and asked, "Is there any news from Baikya and Silla?" Zhao Qiagong looked helpless and said unhappily, "They are still attacking each other. Baikya is reluctant and has been delaying. Silla is interested and is willing to send a team of troops to attack the north." The emperor was displeased. "Didn't they tell them not to fight?" Zhao Qiagong said, "The two countries are suspicious of each other. Baikya is unwilling to stop the war first, and Silla does not trust Baikya, so it has been delayed. These two vassal states could not be counted on," and the emperor sighed in anger. The bullshit who lowered his head below is even more angry. This matter was going well. The three parties shot at the same time. Silla and Baikya occupied a lot of territory, and he also occupied a lot who knew that Silla was so short-sighted. Baikya was in chaos in the country, and he felt that Goguryeo's territory was more difficult to fight, so he turned his head and went to seize the territory that Baikya had seized. It is estimated that the hatred between the two countries will not be resolved for a while. He came out and said, "Your Majesty, it is better to bring the mole people in and attack Goguryeo together." The emperor's eyes brightened and he asked, "Do you have any friendship with the mole people?" He didn't dare to say yes, but said, "I have dealt with them, mole, and I have had friction with me, Dajan, and Goguryeo, but as long as they have money, they are willing to send troops. That is to say, lure them with profit." The emperor touched his chin and said, "You can give it a try, and send an envoy to go to Mohi. The people below should get down immediately." The emperor thought for a while, and felt that if the weather was cold and he could not defeat Goguryeo, he would rely on the cavalry the most, so he said to General AncientChina, "Integrate the Turkic army, and I will send you some troops from other tribes." Now the Hu soldiers under AncientChina are basically Turks, and they are very powerful in cavalry. General AncientChina thought for a while and nodded, thinking that he could add another 2,000 troops. So the emperor ordered Yunzhou and Chuazhu to send 1,000 cavalry to help each other. Man Bao also lived in the city, but she still spent most of the time at the medical account. She went to her room in the dark. Zibing held a lantern in his hand, and when he saw a shadow in front of him, he was startled and whispered, "Who?" Man Bao, who was thinking about something, was startled, so he looked up and was about to ask who Keek was when Shadow stood up. Man Bao. Zibing breathed a sigh of relief, and said to Zhou Man, "Sir, it's an adult." Man Bao stepped forward and saw that Bai Shan was standing in front of the side door of a house. He was not the only one, but there were 3 people beside him. Hearing the voice, they turned their heads together, and when they saw it was Zhou Man, they withdrew their gazes and lowered their heads again. Man Bao glanced at them and asked curiously, "What are you doing here?" Bai Shan said embarrassedly, "Let's get some air here." On the side, Master Fang, who is familiar with Zhou Man, said quietly, "Isn't it true, the inside is full of fat powder, so come out and breathe." Bai Shan. Man Bao pricked up his ears as soon as he heard it, and then vaguely heard the sound of music and singing coming from the house. Man Bao became more energetic and less sleepy, and asked with bright eyes, "Your Majesty is inside?" Bai Shan nodded her forehead, made her stand up straight, and whispered, "Don't be too energetic, you are going to see your Majesty tomorrow, so please put aside your curiosity." Tomorrow, His Majesty will hold a small court meeting, mainly to discuss the next battle, and to understand all aspects, so Zhou Man will also participate. Man Bao glanced at the house scratching his lungs. After a while, he sighed and asked him, "Then do you want to go back?" Bai Shan hesitated for a moment, then turned his head and said to Master Fang, "Master Fang, I can't beat my drinking, so I'll go back to rest first." Mr. Fang. Other adults. So angry, is it amazing to have a daughter-in-law? Thought they didn't? They're just not here. Bai Shan and Man Bao went back. The 2 people's rooms are actually separate, of course, they can also be in one. Bai Shan and Master Fang lived together, and Man Bao had his own room, so he went directly to Man Bao. Zibing immediately went down and asked the servants to bring hot water to wash up the 2 adults, and then turned to look for Daji to ask for Bai Shan's clothes. After taking a shower, Bai Shan sat on the bed, took off his shoes and rubbed his legs cross-legged. Seeing that Man Bao was hugging the quilt, his eyelids were drooping down, so he reached out and pressed her neck, and asked with a smile, "Are you tired?" "Well," Man Bao said, "I am exhausted. As long as there is a war ahead, we are busy in the back. There are still too few students here." Man Bao moved his head, hugged the quilt to find a better position, and asked him to press his shoulders. She said, "We have added 29 new people, plus 2 military doctors, a total of 31 people. I'm still so busy, not to mention that there were only 2 military doctors in the past. I always wondered, after this matter, should we open a separate department in the Imperial Physician's Office to train military doctors? Section finds it cumbersome. Bai Shandao, unless in wars, military doctors are rarely used. Usually 2 in an army are enough, so it is impossible to keep so many military doctors in the army. See you tomorrow.